My name is Ethan Carter, and I'm writing this well. I'm not entirely sure why I'm writing this. Maybe it's a confession. Maybe it's a warning. Discovered why. Maybe it's just the desperate need to get it out, to put the sequence of events down in black and white so that some small, terrified part of my brain can stop replaying them on an endless loop. Therapy hasn't worked. Drinking definitely hasn't worked. So maybe this will. Maybe sharing the sheer, paralyzing terror of what happened in those woods will somehow dilute it. Or maybe it'll just give you nightmares too. Honestly, at this point, I'm past caring about contagion. Misery loves company, right? It all started, as most disasters do, with the best intentions. I needed an escape. Badly. Life in Chicago had become a pressure cooker, demanding job, crumbling relationship, the constant grayness of the city pressing in on me. Sarah and I had finally called it quits, after 5 years, an agonizingly slow death rather than a clean break. Work was piling up, demanding more hours than existed in a day. I felt like a hamster on a wheel, running myself ragged and getting nowhere. I needed space. I needed quiet. I needed nature. The idea of an RV trip had always appealed to me. The freedom of the open road, the self-sufficiency, the ability to just park somewhere beautiful and be. I'd spent weeks researching, watching YouTube videos, reading blogs. Finally, I pulled the trigger and rented a moderately sized Class C motorhome, not too big to be intimidating, but large enough to feel like a rolling apartment. I pictured myself driving scenic routes, hiking pristine trails, sitting by a crackling campfire, under a canopy of stars, far away from the sirens and the stress. Arkansas seemed like the perfect destination. Specifically, the Ouachita National Forest region. Photos online showed stunning vistas, dense forests, sparkling lakes, everything the concrete jungle wasn't. It promised remoteness, solitude. Exactly what I craved. I spent hours plotting a loose route, marking potential campsites on a map, packing gear, hiking boots, fishing rod, a stack of books I'd been meaning to read. I even bought a fancy new camp chair. Looking back, the meticulous planning feels like a cruel joke, like carefully arranging deck chairs on the Titanic. The drive down was uneventful, almost blissful. Cruising down the highway in my borrowed home, on wheels. Windows down, music playing, the city shrinking in the rearview mirror. It felt like liberation. I stopped at roadside diners, chatted with friendly locals, enjoyed the gradual shift in scenery from flat Midwestern plains to the rolling hills of the South. The RV handled surprisingly well, and I quickly grew comfortable behind the wheel. Optimism, a feeling I hadn't experienced in months, started to bubble up inside me. This was going to be good. This was exactly what I needed. I entered Arkansas on a sunny Tuesday afternoon. The air felt different, thicker, somehow scented with pine and damp earth. The roads became narrower, winding through increasingly dense forests. Towering trees crowded the edges, their branches interlocking overhead, creating tunnels of green shadow, even in broad daylight. Cell service became spotty, then disappeared entirely. Perfect, I thought. Exactly the disconnection I was looking for. My target was a dispersed campsite I'd found mentioned on a less trafficked forum, basically. Just a designated pull-off area deep within the national forest. No amenities, just wilderness. The directions involved turning off the state highway onto a progressively smaller series of gravel and dirt roads. The final turn off was barely more than a track, marked by a weathered wooden sign. So faded, you could hardly read the Forest Service number. The gravel crunched loudly under the RV's tires, the sound amplified by the sudden, profound silence of the woods. The last mile or so was slow going. The road was rough, rutted in places, and branches scraped against the sides of the RV like skeletal fingers. Doubt flickered briefly. Was this too remote? Maybe I should have stuck to a more established campground. But I pushed the thought away. This was part of the adventure, right? Getting off the beaten path. Finally, the track opened into a small clearing, just as described online. It was okay. Not quite the idyllic spot the pictures might have suggested, but serviceable. A flattish area large enough for the RV, surrounded on all sides by thick, impenetrable-looking forest. A crudely constructed stone fire pit sat in the center, filled with old ashes and charred logs. The air was still and heavy. No birdsong, no rustling of small animals, just silence. A deep, watchful silence that felt less peaceful and more expectant. I parked the RV, angling it so the main door faced the fire pit and the dense wall of trees beyond. Shutting off the engine plunged the clearing into an even deeper quiet. It pressed in on my eardrums. I got out, stretched, and took a deep breath. The pine scent was strong, almost overwhelming. I did a quick walk around the perimeter. The trees were mostly pine and oak, tall and ancient-looking, their lower branches tangled with thick undergrowth. It felt enclosed, almost claustrophobic. Despite being outdoors, there was no view to speak of, just the clearing and the wall of green. Setting up was straightforward. I leveled the RV, deployed the small awning, unhooked the imaginary utilities, since there were none, and got my camp chair out. I sat for a while, trying to soak in the solitude I'd craved. But instead of peace, a strange unease began to creep in. It was the silence, mostly. Not a natural silence, filled with the buzz of insects or the chirp of birds, but a heavy, waiting silence. And the feeling, the distinct, prickling sensation of being watched. I scanned the tree line, my eyes tracing the dark spaces between the trunks. Nothing, just trees and shadows. I shook my head, chiding myself. City paranoia. Why? Accustomed to constant noise and movement, my brain was just misinterpreting the lack of stimuli. I decided a walk would help clear my head, and maybe shake off the weird vibe. I grabbed a water bottle and my phone. Useless for calls, but it had a downloaded map. And told myself I'd just do a short loop near the campsite. I picked a faint trail, or what looked like it'd be a trail, leading away from the clearing opposite the RV. The woods swallowed me instantly. The light dimmed, filtered through the dense canopy. The ground was soft with fallen pine needles, muffling my footsteps. The air grew cooler, damper. That feeling of being watched intensified. Every snap of a twig under my boot sounded like a gunshot in the stillness. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see I don't know what, an animal, another person. But there was nothing, just the endless trees, standing like silent sentinels. After about 15 minutes, the path became harder to follow, petering out into thick underbrush. I checked my phone map. I hadn't gone far. Still well within what should have been an easy return distance. But turning back, the woods seemed subtly different. Had I come this way? The trees all looked the same. A flicker of panic tightened my chest. Stupid, I told myself. The clearing is right back there. Then I heard it. A low, guttural sound. Not an animal growl I recognized, not a bear, not a coyote, not a boar. It was deeper, wetter, and seemed to vibrate in the air. It came from somewhere off to my left, deeper in the woods. I froze, every muscle tensed. Silence fell again, even heavier than before. I strained my ears, listening so hard my head hurt. Nothing. Had I imagined it? Nerves playing tricks. I started walking back faster, pushing through branches, ignoring the scratches. The feeling of being watched was now a certainty, a physical pressure on my back. I didn't dare run, afraid of tripping, afraid of provoking whatever might be out there. But my steps quickened, my heart hammering against my ribs. I stumbled back into the clearing, breathing heavily, sweat trickling down my temples despite the cool air. The RV stood solid and reassuring, a little island of civilization in this unnerving wilderness. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting long, distorted shadows across the clearing. The woods seemed darker, closer. I locked myself inside the RV, the click of the deadbolt echoing unnaturally loud. I drew the curtains on all the windows, suddenly desperate to shut out the encroaching trees and the unseen eyes I felt sure were watching me. I tried to rationalize the sound I'd heard. A deer, a wild hog, some local animal I wasn't familiar with. But the sound hadn't felt natural. It had felt wrong. As dusk deepened into true twilight, discovered why. Painting the slivers of sky visible above the trees in shades of bruised purple and orange, I tried to busy myself. I made dinner, a simple affair of canned chili heated on the propane stove. The mundane task felt absurdly comforting. But even the hiss of the burner and the clatter of the spoon against the pot couldn't entirely banish the unease. Later, sitting at the small dinette table, forcing myself to eat, I heard another sound. Scratching. A light, persistent scratching sound coming from outside, near the back of the RV. My fork clattered onto the plate. I held my breath, listening. Scritch, scratch, scritch. It sounded like claws. Or maybe dry branches being dragged rhythmically against the metal siding. Slowly, heart pounding, I got up and crept towards the rear window. My hand trembled as I reached for the edge of the curtain, ready to pull it back just a fraction of an inch. The scratching stopped. Abruptly. Silence flooded back in, thick and suffocating. I stood there for a long minute, frozen, listening. Nothing. Just the blood rushing in my ears. Had it been a raccoon, a squirrel, an overhanging branch swaying in a non-existent breeze? It must have been. It had to be. But as I finally retreated from the window, leaving the curtain firmly closed, a cold dread settled deep in my stomach. The sun had now completely set. Outside, the Arkansas woods were plunged into an impenetrable darkness, a darkness that felt ancient and predatory. And I was alone, miles from anywhere, locked inside a metal box, with the distinct feeling that whatever was outside was just getting started. The trip I'd dreamed of as an escape was rapidly morphing into something else entirely. Something terrifying. And this was only the first night. The chili sat heavy and undigested in my stomach. Every nerve ending felt frayed, hypersensitive to the chorus of tiny sounds an RV makes when it's parked, and silent, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of settling suspension, the whisper of my own breathing, which sounded ridiculously loud in the enclosed space. Outside, the darkness was absolute, a thick, velvety black that seemed to press against the thin walls of the motorhome. The comforting sounds of crickets or frogs, the normal night noises I'd expected, were conspicuously absent. It was the same heavy, watchful silence I'd felt earlier, now amplified by the night. I cleaned up my dinner dishes with robotic movements, needing the semblance of normalcy. But my ears strained, trying to decipher every pop and groan from the woods outside. Was that the wind? There wasn't any wind. Was that an animal? What kind? The scratching hadn't returned, but its absence was almost worse. It left a void filled with nervous anticipation. I checked the locks on the main door and the drivel passenger doors for the third time. Solid. I double-checked that all the window blinds were tightly shut. They were. Logically, I knew I was relatively secure inside the RV. It was a solid metal box. But logic had very little purchase on the primal fear coiling in my gut. The woods felt vast, ancient, and utterly indifferent to my flimsy metal shell. And whatever was out there, it felt intelligent, purposeful. Sleep was out of the question. I tried reading one of the books I'd brought, but the words swam meaninglessly on the page. My gaze kept drifting towards the windows, imagining shapes moving just beyond the drawn blinds. I turned on the small battery-powered radio, hoping for some comforting static, some hint of the outside world. Nothing. Not even the faintest signal penetrated this deep into the forest. The silence rushed back in when I switched it off, seeming even more profound than before. Around what must have been 11 p.m., to though time felt warped and elastic in the darkness, the scratching started again. Scritch, scratch, scrape this time. It wasn't just at the back. It moved along the side of the RV, closer to the main door. It was slower, more deliberate than before. Like something was testing the surface, feeling its way along the aluminum siding. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could easily reach, a cast iron skillet from the small kitchenette. It felt pitifully inadequate, but holding its weight was better than empty hands. I stood motionless in the center of the RV, heart hammering, listening. The scratching paused right by the door, then stopped. I held my breath, waiting. Tap. Soft, rhythmic tapping, right on the door window. Not frantic, not demanding, just a tapping. like a visitor announcing their presence. My blood ran cold. This wasn't an animal. Animals don't tap politely. Panic surged, hot in design. Every horror movie trope, every campfire story I'd ever heard screamed at Meg, don't look. Don't engage. Don't acknowledge it. But another, more insidious thought whispered, what if it's someone needing help? An injured hiker. It felt unlikely, deep down, but the sliver of doubt was paralyzing. The tapping stopped. Silence again. Long minutes passed. I didn't move a muscle, skillet held high, eyes glued to the door. Then, a new sound, breathing. Low. Raspy breathing, right outside the door. It sounded congested, wet, like the creature, whatever it was struggling to draw air through damaged lungs. Mixed with the breathing was a faint, guttural clicking noise, like insects chittering deep in a throat. I backed away slowly, bumping into the dinette table. The skillet slipped in my sweaty grasp, clanging against the floor. The breathing outside stopped instantly. A heavy thump landed on the roof of the RV, making the whole vehicle shudder slightly. Dust motes danced in the beam of the single interior light I had on. Another thump, heavier this time, near the front overhang above the cab. It sounded like something large and heavy had just landed up there. Terror gave way to a desperate surge of adrenaline. Get out. Get out now. My mind screamed the command. Forget the campsite, forget the gear, just drive. Drive anywhere. I scrambled towards the driver's seat, fumbling for the keys I'd left on the small counter. My fingers closed around them just as a new sound began, a deep, vibrating hum that seemed to resonate through the floor, through the very air inside the RV. It wasn't mechanical. It felt organic, primal. And it was accompanied by a low, rhythmic scraping sound from directly overhead. Something was moving on the roof. Keys shaking violently in my hand. I jammed them into the ignition. I didn't care about flooding the engine, didn't care about noise. I just needed it to start. I turned the key. Click, werb, click, nothing. The engine wouldn't turn over. Just a weak clicking sound from the starter motor. No, no, I whispered. Panic turning shrill. I tried again. Click, werb, click again. Click, dead. Either the battery was inexplicably drained, or something else was wrong. The scraping on the roof stopped. The humming ceased. An oppressive silence fell once more, broken only by my own ragged gasps for air. Trapped. The realization hit me with physical force, knocking the air from my lungs. I was trapped in this metal box, miles from help. Why? With a dead engine and something unknown lurking just outside, possibly on top of the vehicle. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen in the driver's seat, clutching the useless keys. It felt like hours. The adrenaline ebbed, leaving behind a cold, trembling exhaustion. My mind raced, desperately trying to formulate a plan. Wait until morning. Try to hike out. But the thought of leaving the relative safety of the RV, stepping out into that blackness with whatever was out there, it was unthinkable. At some point, curiosity, or perhaps sheer terror-induced madness, got the better of me. The silence had stretched on for what felt like an eternity. The breathing, the tapping. The thumps on the roof, nothing. Maybe it had gone. Maybe it had lost interest. With agonizing slowness, heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird, I reached for the edge of the blind covering the driver's side window. My fingers trembled so badly I could barely grasp the fabric. Taking a deep breath, I pulled it back less than an inch, pressing my eye to the narrow gap. Pitch black. Utter, absolute blackness. I couldn't see the trees, the fire pit, anything. It was like looking into a void. I scanned the tiny sliver of view available to me. Nothing. I was about to let the blind fall back into place. A wave of shaky relief washing over me when I saw it. Movement. Not clearly defined, but a subtle shift in the darkness. Near the edge of where the clearing should be. A patch of blackness that was somehow darker than the surrounding night. It seemed to coalesce, to gather itself. And then, 2 points of light flickered into existence within that deeper darkness. Eyes, pale, faintly luminous eyes. Why? Reflecting the dim interior light spilling from my tiny window gap. They weren't animal eyes, they were too large, too widely spaced, and seemed to glow with a faint internal light rather than just reflecting mine. They stared directly at the RV. Directly at me. I choked back a cry, letting the blind snap shut. I scrambled backwards out of the driver's seat, stumbling and falling onto the floor of the main cabin. I lay there, curled up, shaking uncontrollably. It hadn't gone. It was still out there, watching, waiting. The rest of the night passed in a haze of sleepless, shivering terror. Every creak of the RV, every rustle from the woods beyond, real or imagined, sent fresh waves of panic through me. I didn't hear the tapping, or the scratching again, nor the breathing. But the presence was still there, a heavy weight in the atmosphere, pressing in from all sides. I stayed huddled on the floor, the skillet clutched to my chest like a child's security blanket, praying for dawn. Finally, agonizingly slowly, we soon discovered why. The first hints of gray began to dilute the oppressive blackness outside. Through tiny gaps in the blinds, I saw the silhouettes of trees gradually emerge from the gloom. Never in my life have I been so grateful to see the sun rise. Its weak, watery light felt like a shield, pushing back the horrors of the night. As the clearing became fully visible in the pale morning light, exhaustion warred with the desperate need to assess the situation. I had to know what had happened. Had I imagined the worst of it? Was the RV damaged? Were there tracks? Steeling myself, I forced my trembling legs to carry me to the door. My hand hovered over the lock. Unlocking it felt like willingly stepping into a predator's den. But I had to see. I had to know. Taking one last deep breath, I turned the deadbolt and pulled the door open, squinting against the morning light. The useless skillet still gripped tightly in my other hand. The clearing looked normal, deceptively peaceful. Dew sparkled on the sparse grass. The fire pit sat cold and gray. The wall of trees looked impassive green and utterly silent. For a crazy second, I wondered if I had dreamt it all, if the isolation and stress had conjured phantoms in the night. Then I looked down. Circling the entire RV, pressed deep into the damp earth and soft pine needles, were tracks. They were large, vaguely humanoid in shape, but disturbingly wrong. The stride was too long, the print too deep for a person. 3 broad, claw-tipped toes pointed forward, with a 4th, smaller one angled back from the heel. Almost like a bird's talon, but massive. They weren't bear tracks, not deer, not anything I could identify. They led out of the woods, circled the RV multiple times, lingered near the door and windows, and thing led up to the front bumper. And on the hood of the RV, right below the windshield, was a single, perfect handprint. It was huge, far larger than any human hand, with long, spindly fingers that ended in what looked like impressions from sharp claws. It was pressed firmly into the morning, dew coating the metal. A clear, terrifying declaration. We were here. We can reach you. My stomach churned. The engine wouldn't start. I was stranded. And the things that had visited me in the night had left proof. They weren't figments of my imagination. They were real. And looking at the woods now, in the clear light of day, didn't feel safe at all. It just felt like they were waiting for the sun to set again. Staring at that monstrous handprint on the dew-slicked hood, reality crashed down on me with now-ceding force. This wasn't a nightmare. This wasn't paranoia. This was real. The tracks, the print, the dead engine, it was all horrifyingly real. Something large, something unnatural. Something intelligent enough to disable my only means of escape had been outside my RV last night, and it knew I was still inside. My first instinct, born of pure panic, was still flight. I scrambled back into the driver's seat and tried the ignition again, pumping the useless accelerator pedal as if that would somehow magically fix it. Click. Where? Click. Silence. The hope that it was just a temporary glitch, maybe a flooded engine from my frantic attempts last night, died a swift death. Okay. Plan B. Assess the damage. With trembling hands, I popped the internal latch for the hood and then reluctantly forced myself back outside into the unnervingly quiet morning. The air was cool, but sweat prickled my skin. Every tree seemed like a hiding place. Every shadow seemed to hold a lurking shape. I kept the heavy skillet grip tight, scanning the tree line constantly as I walked around to the front of the RV. Lifting the heavy hood felt opening Pandora's box. I half expected something to leap out at me. What I saw was almost worse in its implications. It wasn't random failure. The thick, rubber-coated battery cables hadn't been chewed through by animals, they'd been cut. Cleanly severed, as if by heavy-duty shears or bolt cutters. The metal connectors lay uselessly on the engine block. Nearby, a couple of smaller wires leading into the distributor cap looked deliberately pulled loose. Sabotage. Calculated, methodical sabotage. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just some beast randomly bumping into the RV. This was planned. This creature, whatever it was, understood mechanics. It knew how to disable a vehicle. The implications were staggering, terrifying. It suggested a level of intelligence far beyond any animal, something closer to malevolent human. Cunning, but wielded by something distinctly non-human. I slammed the hood shut, the sound echoing loudly in the clearing. Sabotage meant repairs were likely beyond my capability. I had tools, a basic kit that came with the rental, but splicing heavy battery cables without the right equipment. Out here. Impossible. I checked my phone again, holding it high above my head, walking around the small clearing in a desperate, futile search for even a single bar of signal. Nothing. Still the mocking, no service, indicator. The radio inside was equally useless. I was well and truly cut off. Stranded. My eyes scanned the RV's exterior more closely now. High up on the side, near the roofline, were long, deep gouges in the aluminum siding, matching the scraping sounds I'd heard. I walked around to the back, near where the first scratching had occurred. More gouges, and faint, muddy impressions of those 3 toyed tracks leading up to the rear access ladder. It had climbed up there. The thumps on the roof it had been walking around directly above my head. Bile rose in my throat, summoning every ounce of courage I possessed. I pulled the ladder down and forced myself to climb up, skillet still in hand. The roof was coated in the same morning dew, and across its white surface, the tracks were clear. Those same monstrous, 3-toed prints crisscrossed the roof, concentrated around the ventilation covers and the air conditioning unit. There were more scrapes and gouges here too. It had been probing, testing, maybe trying to find a way in. The thought of it succeeding, of those claws ripping through the thin ceiling while I cowered below. I scrambled back down the ladder, legs shaking. The sun climbed higher, burning off the dew but doing little to dispel the chilling atmosphere. The woods remained unnervingly silent. No birds, no squirrels, just the occasional rustle of leaves that could have been wind, or could have been something else. That feeling of being watched was a constant pressure, a prickling awareness at the back of my neck. Several times, I caught fleeting movement out of the corner of my eye, a flicker of shadow between the trees, a patch of darkness that seemed to shift, but whenever I snapped my head around, there was nothing there. Was it my frayed nerves, the lack of sleep, or were they out there, just beyond, the edge of sight, patiently observing me? I retreated inside the RV, locking the door, needing the illusion of security. But the knowledge of the cut cables, the tracks on the roof, the sheer intelligence behind it all, made the metal walls feel paper thin. I was trapped in a box, and the thing outside knew it, and it was smart. Hours crawled by. I tried to eat some crackers, but my mouth was too dry. I drank water sparingly, suddenly acutely aware that my supply was finite. Panic began to give way to a grim, exhausting dread. I knew night would fall again, and I knew it would be back. What was its goal? Was it territorial? Was it hunting me? The uncertainty was almost as bad as the fear itself. Mid-afternoon, driven by a desperate need to do something, anything, other than wait helplessly, I decided to make a cautious exploration of the immediate vicinity. Maybe I could find a water source, a stream, anything to supplement my supply. Maybe I'd find something, some clue. Armed with the skillet and a large wrench from the toolkit, I eased the RV door open and stepped outside again. I stayed close to the clearing's edge, never letting the RV out of my sight. I scanned the ground, looking for more tracks, anything unusual. Near the spot where I heard the guttural sound the previous day, I found something. Scratched deeply into the bark of a massive oak tree were symbols. They weren't letters or numbers I recognized. Crude, jagged lines, spirals, and shapes that looked vaguely like distorted eyes. They looked fresh, the exposed wood underneath still pale. Had they been made last night? Were they warnings, markers, claims of territory? A little further on, tucked beneath a tangle of ferns, I saw a small pile of bones. Animal bones, bleached white by the sun. Mostly small animals, squirrels. Rabbits maybe, but they weren't scattered randomly, as they would be after a predator's meal. They were arranged in a deliberate, unsettling pattern, almost like a miniature effigy or symbol, mirroring some of the jagged shapes carved into the tree. A cold knot formed in my stomach. This wasn't just a creature. This was ritualistic. This was something old and deeply wrong. I backed away slowly, the woods suddenly feeling 10 times more menacing. The silence pressed in, heavy and charged. I imagined unseen eyes following my every move from the dense undergrowth. I retreated quickly to the relative safety of the RV, locking myself back inside, heart pounding. The rest of the afternoon was spent in a state of high anxiety, preparing for the inevitable return of night. I wedged the heavy net table against the main door, reinforcing it with a couple of bags packed with canned goods for extra weight. It wouldn't stop something strong enough to climb onto the roof, but it might slow it down, give me a precious few seconds. I gathered potential weapons: the skillet, the wrench, the sharpest kitchen knife I had. I found a small, ridiculously inadequate emergency flare gun in a compartment, loaded with 3 flares. Better than nothing, I supposed. Could I blind it? Scare it off with the noise and light? As the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples visible through the windshield, the dread intensified. The woods grew darker, the shadows stretching like grasping fingers across the clearing. The oppressive silence returned, broken only by the frantic thumping of my own heart. I turned off the main interior lights, leaving only a single small LED lamp on low, casting flickering shadows inside the cabin. I positioned myself on the floor near the back, away from the main door and windows, clutching the knife and the flare gun. Every sense was on high alert. Dusk settled. The last rays of sunlight vanished from the treetops. The clearing dissolved into shades of gray, then into near total blackness. The waiting began. It didn't take long. First came the sound. That low, guttural clicking and wet breathing I'd heard the night before. But this time, it wasn't just from one direction. It came from the trees to the left. Then, an answering sound from the right. Then from behind the RV. It sounded like multiple sources. Like there wasn't just one anymore. They were communicating, coordinating. My breath hitched. My knuckles were white where I gripped the knife. The air in the RV felt thick, hard to draw into my lungs. Then silence. A long, drawn-out pause that stretched my nerves to the breaking point. Tap. A single soft tap on the window directly behind my head. I flinched violently, stifling a cry. Tap. Tap. Another window near the front. Scrahoppy. The sound of claws dragging slowly down the side of the RV thump. Something landed on the roof again. Heavier this time. They were back. And this time, there were more of them. The barricaded door, the knife, the flare gun, they all felt utterly, hopelessly inadequate. The second night had begun, and I had a terrible feeling it was going to be much, much worse than the first. The symphony of terror outside swelled. The tapping became insistent drumming, hitting multiple windows at once with hard, sharp raps that threatened to shatter the glass. The scraping sounds intensified, moving faster, tracing frantic patterns across the thin, metal skin of the RV. The guttural clicking and wet, ragged breed, things seemed to be everywhere, a disorienting chorus of inhuman menace. And the thump on the roof was joined by others. Heavy impacts that made the whole vehicle rock violently on its suspension, sending loose items tumbling from shelves. I stayed huddled on the floor, knife in one hand, flare gun in the other, trying to make myself as small as possible. The barricade against the door groaned under repeated, heavy impacts. Thud. 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 Splinters of wood flew inwards from the door frame. They were trying to break it down. Panic threatened to overwhelm me completely. I squeezed my eyes shut, wishing I could just disappear. This was it. This was how it ended, torn apart by unknown horrors in the middle of nowhere, Arkansas. My stupid escape, my search for peace, had led me directly into the jaws of something ancient and hungry. A high-pitched screech, like metal tearing, ripped through the air from above. One of the roof vents. They were trying to peel it open. Dust and debris rained down near the kitchenette. I could hear frantic scratching and tearing sounds directly overhead. "Get away!" I screamed, my voice hoarse and cracking. "Leave me alone!" The sounds outside paused. For a heartbeat, an unnerving silence fell, broken only by own ragged breathing. Then, a low sound, chillingly close to the torn roof vent, answered me. It wasn't a growl or a screech. It sounded, disturbingly, like mimicry. A distorted, guttural echo of my own plea. Deve, him Lunnock. Nausea rolled over me. They could mimic speech. Understanding dawned with sickening clarity. They weren't just intelligent. They were learning. Observing. The assault redoubled, more ferocious than before. The RV rocked so violently I was thrown against the wall. A sickening crack echoed through the small space as one of the side windows spider-webbed under a heavy blow. They hadn't broken through yet, but the plexiglass bulged inwards, fractured lines spreading like icy veins. Then, through the torn roof vent, something descended. A long, pale limb, thin and multi-jointed, ending in needle-sharp, black claws. It twitched, feeling the air, dripping some kind of thick, dark saliva onto the floor below. The skin was corpse-white, stretched taut over unnatural bone structures. It blindly swept the space below, claws scraping against the ceiling panels. That was it. Pure, instinctual survival kicked in, overriding the paralysis of fear. I raised the flare gun, my hand shaking uncontrollably, aimed towards the horrifying appendage and pulled the trigger. Whoosh, crack. The flare ignited with a blinding magnesium, white flash and a deafening bang inside the confined space. It struck the limb, showering it with sparks. An unearthly shriek pierced the night, a sound of agony and rage that vibrated deep in my bones. The limb retracted instantly. Outside, the shrieking was joined by a cacophony of enraged clicks and guttural howls from the other creatures. The flare, ricocheting off the ceiling, landed on the small upholstered bench of the dinette, which instantly began to smolder. Smoke started to fill the cabin. Blinded by the flash, ears ringing, choking on the acrid smoke, I scrambled towards the front. The creatures outside went berserk. The RV was slammed with renewed fury, rocking like a boat in a storm. The damaged window finally gave way with an explosive pop, showering the interior with sharp fragments of plexiglass. The main door shuddered under blows that sounded like they were delivered with a battering ram. I had maybe seconds. The flare had bought me a moment of chaos. Maybe driven one of them back, but it had enraged the others. Staying inside meant suffocating, or being torn apart, when they inevitably breached the door or widened the hole in the roof. There was only one chance, however slim: escape. Into the woods, into their territory. It was madness, but it was the only option left besides certain death in this metal coffin. I grabbed the knife, stuffed the remaining 2 flares into my pocket, and lunged for the passenger door in the cab. It was separate from the main living area, hopefully less of a focus for their attack. My fingers fumbled with the lock, then the handle. Praying it wasn't jammed, I threw it open and tumbled out into the cold night air. For a split second, I was frozen, caught in the hellish tableau. The RV, smoke pouring from its broken window and torn roof vent, rocked under the assault, unseen shapes hammering its sides. The air vibrated with those awful clicking, breathing sounds. The pale, luminous eyes I'd seen the night before seemed to float in the darkness at the edge of the trees, dozens of them, all fixed on the besieged motorhome. They hadn't seen me exit the cab door yet. Run. My legs obeyed before my brain fully processed the command. I sprinted away from the RV, away from the clearing, plunging headlong into the black, tangled woods on the opposite side from where I'd entered. Branches whipped at my face, roots snagged my feet, but I didn't slow down. Behind me, a piercing shriek signaled they knew I was out. The sounds of the assault on the RV lessened slightly, replaced by crashing sounds in the underbrush as they began to give chase. I ran blindly, fueled by sheer terror. I had no sense of direction, no idea where I was going, only knowing I had to get away from the clicking, from the breathing, from those glowing eyes. The forest floor was uneven, treacherous in the dark. I stumbled, fell, picked myself up, and kept running, lungs burning, heart threatening to explode. How long I ran, I don't know. It felt like an eternity. The sounds of pursuit seemed to fade slightly. Or maybe the blood pounding in my ears just drowned them out. I risked a glance behind me, nothing but impenetrable blackness. But I could still feel them. That prickling sense of being hunted, of unseen eyes tracking me through the trees. Then, disaster. My foot caught on a thick root, hidden beneath the leaf litter. And I went down hard, my head cracking against something solid, a rock or another root. Stars exploded behind my eyes. Pain flared, sharp and sickening. I lay there, stunned, gasping for breath, the world swimming around me. As my vision started to clear, I heard it. Close. That wet, ragged breathing. And the soft clicking. Coming from just ahead of me, deeper in the darkness I'd been running towards. I hadn't escaped them. I'd run right into another one. Panic squeezed the air from my lungs. I fumbled for the flares in my pocket, pulling one out. My hands were slick with sweat and dirt. I tried to raise the flare gun, but my arm felt weak, uncoordinated from the fall. A shape detached itself from the deeper shadows. Tall, impossibly thin. Moving with an unnatural, jerky gait. It blocked out the faint starlight filtering through the canopy. I could see the pale gleam of its eyes, fixed on me. It raised one of those long, clawed hands. This was it. No more running. I closed my eyes, bracing for the end. A deafening roar split the night. Not from the creature, but from somewhere else. Followed by the unmistakable sound of multiple gunshots, loud and close. Bang. Bang. Bang, bang. My eyes snapped open. The creature in front of me recoiled, letting out that ear-splitting shriek before melting back into the shadows with impossible speed. More crashing sounds echoed through the woods as, presumably, the others also retreated from the unexpected noise and aggression. Headlights cut through the trees, bouncing wildly. A vehicle, an old pickup truck, engine roaring, was crashing its way through the underbrush nearby, its lights sweeping the woods. "Hey, anybody out here?" A gruff voice yelled over the engine noise. "Hello?" Hope, fierce and desperate, surged through me. "Here," I croaked, my voice barely a whisper. "Help. Here." The truck ground to a halt perhaps 50 yards away. A figure emerged, silhouetted against the headlights, holding a rifle. Saw the flare from the logging road. The man yelled. Thought it was kids messing around, till I heard that screaming. "You all right?" I couldn't answer. Relief washed over me in a dizzying wave, and the world tilted, darkness closing in from the edges. The last thing I remember is the crunch of boats on leaves approaching me, and the gruff voice muttering, "Good God, son." We soon discovered why. "What in the Sam Hill happened to you?" The UBBMP. I woke up in a hospital bed in a small town hours away. The official story involved a bear attack and disorientation leading to a head injury. The county sheriff, a wary-looking man with kind eyes, listened patiently to my fragmented, frantic story of impossible creatures, sabotage, and glowing eyes. He nodded sympathetically. "Told me the woods can play tricks on you, especially when you're alone and stressed," he mentioned. "Wild hogs, bears, maybe even local pranksters," though he admitted the cut battery cables were odd. They found the RV, of course. Trashed. Windows broken, roof vent torn open. The interior scorched by the flare and covered in debris. They found the strange tracks, which were dismissed as unidentifiable. Maybe a deformed bear, or multiple animals trampling the site. The handprint was long gone, washed away by rain that fell later that day. The bones and symbols I mentioned weren't found, or weren't reported. Case closed. Animal attack, possibly combined with hiker distress. I didn't argue. I knew what I'd seen. I knew what I'd heard. I knew the cold, intelligent malice I'd faced in that clearing. The man who found me, an old logger named Jed, just shook his head when I tried to thank him later. His eyes dark. "Yo, ain't nothing good in them woods off Route 7 after dark, son," he'd muttered. Some things are best left alone." He wouldn't elaborate. My RV camping trip to Arkansas was supposed to be an escape, a reset. Instead, it became a descent into terror that shattered my reality. It was a deadly mistake. Not just for my peace of mind, which is permanently scared, but almost for my life. I left Chicago seeking solitude, and found something ancient and predatory waiting in the silent places off the map. I'm back in the city now, surrounded by noise and people, but the silence of those woods haunts my sleep. Sometimes, late at night, when the city quiets down, I think I hear it, a faint, guttural clicking sound, carried on the wind. Or I see a flicker of movement in the shadows, the suggestion of eyes watching from the dark. I don't know what those things were. Locals might have names for them, legends whispered around campfires, warnings ignored by outsiders like me. All I know is they're real, they're intelligent, and they own those woods. So, if you're thinking of an RV trip, seeking solitude deep in the wilderness, maybe stick to the crowded campgrounds. Stay on the main roads. Don't ignore the faded warning signs on lonely dirt tracks. Because some places aren't meant for us. Some places harbor secrets that are best left undisturbed. And some mistakes like mine you only get to make once. If you're lucky.